You guys will not be seen on the screen, so you don't have to worry about that. If you have any questions, please unmute yourself and ask, because during the presentation, I can't see any chats. If you have to leave because you have another work thing or you've got something else going on, no worries, you can do that. You're not gonna hurt my feelings. And yeah, on that note, we're gonna get started with lighting. After I figure out how to share my screen. There we go. So here we are for photo school. If you were with me yesterday, if you can figure out how to make yourself look like this with 4 different cameras, 5, 6 different cameras attached to you, please do so. Send me a picture. All right, today we are talking about light. So we're going to learn the qualities and characteristics of light so you can kind of start to master it, because without photo, without light, we have no photo. Photo is light in Greek, excuse me. So just some things to deal with, to talk about with light. It creates a story and a mood, if not more than composition does. So one, it continues to tell people what you want them to look at in your photo, but it definitely sets the tone and the mood of how you want your photo to be perceived by the audience. Always look at where your light falls and where it doesn't fall. Do you want a meter for your highlights or for your shadows? So your highlights, if you're looking at this image of this ceramic fruit, your highlights are the things that they're bright or they're white. And your shadows are where it gets dark. So you can see the shadows kind of behind these fruits and vegetables, maybe a little bit in the corners where there's a little bit of natural vignetting from the lens. You can pick to meter, and meter is your measurement of light. You can pick to meter for shadows, or you can choose to meter for highlights. You can easily do this on your phone by tapping in certain areas of your screen that are light or dark. And you're going to notice that when you tap or when you meter for your shadows, everything light is going to blow out. It is going to get super bright and contrasty. And then the opposite will happen if you meter for your highlights. A lot of the shadows are going to fall to black. The intensity of that is going to depend on the intensity of your light, and we'll kind of dig into that. What I love about on your phone is you can tap and you can move your slider up or down if you want to kind of adjust your exposure and adjust the lighting for that specific picture versus having to try to edit it later. Another thing that I absolutely love is to be experimental with your light. Be sure you just have a solid shot for your assignment if you're shooting for somebody, or even if you're shooting for yourself. But be experimental with it. Try new things all the time. Just look at the way that light hits things and different surfaces and different textures, and play around with it. On that note, always look for reflections too, especially with light and different textures, because you're going to add a visual variety to your frame. So we're going to start by talking about the 4 characteristics of light. And if you were with me yesterday, you know that I'm going to delve into all of these. So if you're taking notes and you're like me and you're very anal about how your notes look, hold tight. So your 4 characteristics of light are quality, intensity, direction, and color. So on that note, quality. Quality deals with the size and the distance of your light source relative to the subject or whatever it is you're photographing. So if you have a very small light source, you're going to get hard light. Hard light is defined by really distinctive shadows. It's like you can take a pencil and you can trace out those shadows perfectly. And sometimes you get really overblown highlights with it. And then a large light source is going to give you very soft light. So soft light is really hard to distinguish. Just like in this photo, you can kind of see the shadows surrounding this hand pie, but not fully and not entirely. And it's a little hard to figure out exactly where you would trace around. The sun, believe it or not, is a small light source because it is so far away from the earth. However, on beautiful sunny days like we're having here in North Carolina today, like we have really, really hard light. But if it's overcast, those clouds are taking that light and diffusing it and making the sun light source very large, so you get very soft light. Here's another example of hard light. If you look around the popsicles, you look around the pieces of cucumber in the book, you can easily distinguish where you would need to draw your shadows. Here's an example of soft light. There's not many shadows in this photo at all. You can see a little bit under the gray plates, but shadows for the most part don't exist. This is in a venue that has a huge skylight, the length of the restaurant, that is frosted. So it's just this really beautiful natural diffuser. When it comes to portraits, you can play around with hard and soft light. I wouldn't say that one necessarily is better than the other. I think it is just upon your personal preference. So this photo on the left, we have some much softer light. You can still see a little bit of the shadows on his face and like from where his collar is hitting his shoulder, but it's very nice and soft. Whereas if you look at the photo on the right hand side, the shadows, don't necessarily see any shadows on his face because they're falling behind him. But if you look on the booth, you can see these really distinct shadows of his arm. Even where he's holding this dumpling, you can catch that perfect shadow on his shirt. Again, I don't think there's a right or wrong as to what type of light you use to shoot portraits, whether you use soft or hard light. You're gonna get a different look with either, and it's totally your personal preference. All right, any questions so far on quality of light? All right, we are gonna keep on. Our second characteristic is intensity. The intensity is the brightness and strength of light relative to your subject. So this is very cool because intensity can greatly control the mood of your photograph. And what we have are two things. We have high key and low key, and not low key in the way that we talk about, someone being low key angry, but high key is where we have really bright light and bright colors. If you were to look at a map of the light in your photo, you have more whites than you have blacks. And low key is exactly the opposite of that. You have dark.
Almost done with this email.
Hey, Mac, how are you? Mac, if you don't mind putting your.
Yes, sorry.
It's okay. But with low key, you're going to have darker lights and darker colors. Again, if you look at this graph, you'll have more blacks on your map than you do whites. And this can greatly affect the mood. Obviously, in an image like this of a star bowl full of bright colored tomatoes, that's kind of a happy image. Here are some other examples of high key images where the light is really bright, which ultimately means your colors seem really bright. You have a lot of whites versus this where our blacks and our darker shades are more powerful in the photo than our lights. So this would be low key. This is high key. Direction. Light has a lot of directions, and this is arguably probably one of the most important things I'm going to talk about today, because the direction of light is going to greatly affect how your subjects look, whether it's food or people or still lifes. Also, its direction is really neat because you can create a lot of effects with your light depending on the direction. So we will kind of go through these different directions. Keep in mind that all of this is subject to the way that the light is falling on your subject rather than how it is coming from you, the photographer. So front light is going to fall directly on your subject, and it is coming from the direction of the photographer. That means as a photographer, the light is coming from somewhere near where I am. It can either be behind me as a photographer, it could be on my camera, it could be an off-camera flash or studio light, and my subject could be turned in any direction they want to be turned in. So that is front light. Backlight is coming from behind your subject, shooting into the camera. So this usually comes with a myriad of issues that can be really hard to photograph. Sometimes you're going to get images with backlight that are really blown out, or sometimes you're going to get sun flares, and sometimes you're going to create silhouettes out of your subjects with this backlight. You can also create like this halo effect with people's hair with backlight. I personally really love backlight, especially when I'm shooting portraiture, just because it usually adds a little bit of interest to the frames. Side light, this is pretty simple. If you're looking at your subject, the light is coming from either side, left or right. And this really helps to create texture with your subjects. On that note, my grandma hates when I photograph her with side light because she says it exaggerates her wrinkles. I think they're gorgeous. She would beg to differ, so we're gonna let it go. And I don't photograph her with side light, at least that she sees. So side light is really great. It'll also accentuate, like in this photo, you can see like this texture of this velvet. This is a photo I made with Sarah, who's in this class. You can also see how it's accentuating like the texture of this galette dough and this chocolate in the middle, and it's something that I would really love to have right now. But side light is great. It's probably your most used type of light. Then you have above and below light, and this is light that just falls either from above because of a spotlight or a skylight, or you personally put your studio light above or below. This creates kind of a spotlighting effect, or like this campfire effect. But it's not used all that often, but when it is used really well, it's really beautiful. And the biggest thing you can do to figure out direction is always look at your shadows. And they're going to tell you the direction in which the light is coming from, but also the height at which they're coming from. So you can have front light that is directly in front of somebody, or you can shoot it up, you know, so it's 45 degrees up or 45 degrees low coming in and onto your subject. Same thing with backlight and side light. Above and below light, you really can't move those all that much. All right, so here are some examples of front lighting. So if you can tell, like, we really don't have a whole lot of shadows happening here, or the shadows are falling on the backdrop behind. On this orange, we're not really seeing any shadows, maybe just a tiny bit directly under it. And behind this subject in this portrait, we see how the shadows are kind of falling behind her on the backdrop and underneath, if you look at the base of the stool that she's sitting on, but you're not really seeing any distinctive shadows hitting her face. Here's some good examples of side light. You can tell based off of where the shadows are coming from that the light is to the side of the subjects, or the side of these, you know, these eggs and all of this. So you're getting some interesting light and shadow play with side light. You're also really seeing the texture of these surfaces and the texture of the food. Here's some examples of backlight. So here's on the left-hand side, again, I really suck at my left and right, so I keep having to do this with my hands every time I am talking about it. But we have this backlight that is coming in behind this man's shoulder. It is creating some sun flare. We have some really like nice, gorgeous, hazy sunlight pouring into this photo. You can see a little bit of that flare continuing onto the dog's ear. This is definitely where I metered for the shadows, so it blew out the background into something that is really bright and light and airy. Whereas in the second image, I took this sunset and I metered for the highlights, which would be in the clouds and in the sky, and it sent everything else straight into a silhouette. So there are some really fun things that you can do with backlighting. And here's some examples of some above and, well, only above, because I don't have any examples of below lighting. But in the image of this dining room, you have light that's pouring in from a skylight, so you can see how these shadows are falling in. And in the image of the seafood, you can see that there's no real shadows on the top of this food, but if you look, there's just barely some shadows hanging out underneath these vessels and underneath the forks and underneath all this gorgeous, tasty mess. So that is how we're able to tell where our light is coming from. With that, we're going to talk about a couple different angles of lighting, especially for portraits, because I find a lot of people are really curious about how to light portraits well. So we have something called a high 45. So that's when the light can either be to the left or right, and it doesn't have to be completely to the side, but maybe 45 degrees angle off of your subject, and your light is really high and it is pointing down. So you're going to get really beautiful, like in this first portrait, you can see where the shadows are, so you can see where the light source is streaming into this photo. You're going to see that you're not going to get a lot of shadows on people's faces. You're getting this really gorgeous creamy light with a little bit of interest and a little bit of intrigue. Beauty lighting is just the same as a high 45, except it is directly in front of your subject. So in the second portrait on the right-hand side, that is where that light is. You can tell based off of the shadows that are being created by her glasses. Typically, you also get what we call a butterfly shadow under the nose and under the lip. And if you have really beautiful, luscious eyelashes, you might get a little bit of a shadow under your eyelashes. Beauty lighting stems from early Hollywood days when the leading lady in the film, somebody would actually walk around with a certain type of modifier that made this light super gorgeous and very creamy, and it would be up in front of this actress the entire film, which is where it gets its name, beauty lighting. This is what we would call Rembrandt lighting. And Rembrandt lighting is when your lighting is just far enough to the side of your subject and the light perfectly spills over their nose to create this triangle on the top of their cheek. Rembrandt lighting is named after Rembrandt because you see this a lot in a lot of the portraits that he painted. The last one that I have on this list is called split lighting. I did not have any examples of this and didn't have time to find one, but that is when someone's face, part of it is perfectly lit and the other half is completely in shadow. So if you think about our direction of light, when it comes to split lighting, it is directly next to your subject's face or head. It's not angled at all next to them. Any questions on portrait lighting? All right, so we're still kind of talking about direction of light. So our next subcategory under direction is the idea of having a key light, a fill light, and using multiple light sources. So a key light is your primary light source in your photo, and it directs your audience's eye to your focal point. If you look at this photo of this dancer, the key lighting is the light that is primarily lighting his face that is closest to the camera, not the blue light. A fill light is a light you use typically opposite of your key light that's not as powerful, and it helps to fill your shadows that are cast from the key light, so you're not ending up with as much contrast. You can choose to do this with a light. You can choose to do this with a reflector on a mirrored side or on a white side. You can pick. You can choose to not have a fill light at all. And then lastly, multiple light sources. You can have light coming from multiple directions and lighting your subject in multiple areas. And they can even, if you look at this photo, your lights can be different colors. But typically you will always have one that is the strongest, and that is always your key light. Again, always just look for the shadows to know what direction that light is coming from. Any questions on key lights and fill lights, or using multiple lights to take pictures? On that note, something I didn't really talk about with this, if you want to take away light opposite of your key light instead of filling something, you can always use the black side of a reflector or a black board, like a foam board or something, and that will continue to suck that light away, which is going to give you more dramatic shadows. You see a lot of that with tabletop photography. Sometimes you see a lot of that with portrait photography, depending on the mood you're trying to go for. So here's some examples of multiple light sources. In this photo on the left, we can tell that the main light in this subject is the light that is falling on this woman who is cooking. And then we have a secondary light source that is coming through the slats on this wall and is illuminating the steam and is kind of giving her a little bit of light on the side of her face and on the side of her arm. In the photo on the right-hand side, you can even see the light sources in this one, but our key light is the light that is illuminating our main subject. And then in the background, you can see there are these lights up in this market space that are adding some intrigue and adding a little bit of highlights kind of to the top of his head. But that's really the only place you see those highlights coming in. Here's another example of using multiple lights. Again, from this shoot with Sarah, there's going to be a lot of those. But if you look, our light that is falling on the woman in the yellow and the woman in the gold, you're kind of like have this really nice bright light. And then there's a second light that's shooting in that is pink, that is kind of adding a little bit of extra highlights to their faces. And if you're not sure if this had multiple lights, just by looking at these two ladies, if you look at the background, you can see the different shadows you're getting from each light source. So you can see that there's two shadows of the faucet, there's two shadows of the light, there's two shadows of the cups. So find your shadows, and that is going to tell you where the light is coming from. Any questions on direction of light? I'm just going to scroll back through and make sure I didn't forget anything.
Hey, Lauren, my name is Rachel.
Hey.
I was curious, when you have like in that last shot with the two women, your fill light, you know, these are both seem to be pretty, you know, kind of harsh directional light. If you were kind of going for your fill light to be a little softer, would you kind of slap a modifier on that, or maybe reduce the power a little bit to kind of eliminate that second shadow?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I would probably do both of those things. So a lot of the times when I'm trying to add a little fill light just to kind of take away some of that shadow versus creating like, these were really harsh, intentional lighting choices I made on this shoot. But if I was just trying to like pop a little light in so things weren't so contrasty, I usually will pop a modifier on, usually a small softbox or a small, like a beauty dish, and then cut that power. I usually always start the power of my second light at half of what my key light is. And then I kind of adjust from there based on the look that I'm trying to achieve.
Got it. Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions, guys? Or ladies? Better yet, just people. All right, we're gonna keep on going. So our fourth characteristic of light is color. And there are a lot of ways to create color with your light in your photos. light has different color qualities, and the color that your light is ultimately going to impact the mood of your photo. And sometimes our eye cannot decipher the colors of the light because our eyes automatically adjust for the temperature of light. Our cameras do not do that because our cameras are not as powerful as our brains are and as our optical nerves. So first thing we're going to talk about is the color temperature of light. This can be cool or warm. This is also known as your white balance, and it's measured on the Kelvin temperature scale. So if you're ever looking at your cameras and you see something that's labeled 5300 K, that's talking about the temperature of the light that your camera is seeing, or the temperature that you've set your camera to see. This is why I think it's really important to always check your white balance before shooting. And if you can, I think it's best to preset it every time you shoot. That way you're making sure your whites are staying white and your grays are staying gray, and you're not making people's skin turn into Oompa Loompas, unless of course that's your intention. Although I will say a lot of the automatic white balance adjustments are really great now on your cameras, but sometimes you can be in really tricky situations like school gyms or clubs or restaurants, or even your house late at night when you have your lamps turned on, where you're going to get a really overwhelming color of light. So just as a couple notes, really bright midday sun is very cold light. So on your Kelvin scale, it's going to be on the lower end of your temperatures. Tungsten bulbs, even like the LED bulbs now that you can buy, you can pick warm and golden light. So they tend to be very warm, very yellow, kind of orange. Fluorescent bulbs tend to have a green or pink tint, and they can make your subjects, especially for photographing people, look really sick. You'll hear a lot in photography that if you see fluorescent bulbs, run. And sometimes you can't, and you just have to learn how to deal with that. And or you could use a flash to kind of create your own light in those situations. Now, there's 2 times a day that are the most magical times of day in the world of photography, and that is golden hour and magic hour. Golden hour would be your hour after sunrise or your hour before sunset. Depending on the time of year, it can definitely be a little longer. But this is when your light is really gold, your shadows are really long. It's just rich and it is vibrant, and it is that the sun is really low to the horizon. So you get this like side light everywhere you go, mostly, just depending upon where you place yourself and where you place your subject. And then magic hour, this would be your half hour or so before sunrise and after sunset, when there's still some sun glow in the sky. You typically get colors that are pink and purple and blue. These times of days are absolutely beautiful. Embrace them and embrace how they're going to change the colors of what you're photographing. And know that our minds are smart enough, and our audience's minds are smart enough to decipher that those are photographed at a certain time of day, and it's okay if our whites aren't perfectly white, or our skin tones are different colors because of the light that you're photographing in. Other ways you can add color to your light, you can use gels, which are colored sheets of plastic that change your light. You can pop those over flashes or studio lights, or even like video lights or LED panels. Make sure, however, if you're doing this, you're buying proper gels and not just like the colored cellophane wrapping paper that you can buy at Target, because gels, that plastic is meant to be able to withstand the heat that your lights are putting off, and you do not want to melt plastic. It stinks, or set anything on fire. That would really suck. And then lastly, sometimes you can shoot something that is overwhelmingly one color, and that is really going to mess with your white balance. So always, 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 if you have the opportunity, preset your white balance for every situation you're photographing in. All right, now for some examples. So lighthouse, some of you guys saw this image yesterday. You're going to see a couple repeating images. Sorry about that. This photo is shot during golden hour. You can look at the grass. You can look at the light source that is kind of coming out from the right side of this photo and see that really rich gold look. Typically, when you're shooting during golden hour and you have these really beautiful, rich golds, your shadows are going to fall to the opposite of that gold, which is this blue, kind of cyan look. Go with it. Embrace it. The next photo of the Washington Monument, this is shot during magic hour. So we have those really beautiful pinks and purples and oranges and blues that are kind of coming through this photo. Here's an example of our different colors of light that we're seeing. So my camera white balance is set to make sure that the restaurant front, the storefront, is seen properly, which it has these, if you look up where it says 32 and 32, it definitely has these tungsten bulbs. So it's warm, but our white is still white. And what that did is change our shadows. Opposite of that golden hue is this blue. We also have two other light sources kind of happening. We have this top light source that is in the very, very top middle of our frame, just outside of the frame. That is a very cool white light. Then we also have the light that is popping up that this guy is probably taking a selfie or talking on FaceTime or something like that. So you, with your camera, sometimes depending on the situations you're shooting in, your camera's going to kind of pick and choose the color of light that it wants to see. You have the ability to control the color through white balance. Here's an example, again, shooting at golden hour. Everything is this nice, gorgeous, beautiful golden hue. You have a little bit of the light that is pouring through your flags up top, and everything else, for the most part, falls to a silhouette, because if you think about our direction of light, our light is behind everything. So it is pouring straight into the camera. If you weren't sure, you can also look at the shadows of the cars and the shadows of the people walking. Here's another example of both using backlight and also shooting during this golden hour. We can tell it's backlight because we see the sun. It's shooting straight into the camera. The seagull and this dock are completely silhouetted. We know what time of day it is because we can look at the color of light in this photo and be able to decipher that it's either sunrise or sunset. But again, shooting at different times of day, you're going to get really beautiful, rich colors, or really kind of washed out, really bright colors. It just depends on the look that you're going for. And this is an example of shooting with something that is overwhelmingly a certain color, where I absolutely had to set my white balance manually. On your phones, if you download some apps like Manual or Moment, where you can control your phone camera a little bit more, you can also control your white balance. On your cameras, it's typically a setting that you can find in your menu for sure, but a lot of times there's just like a quick menu button on top where you can adjust your white balance. Any questions on the color of light before we move forward?
Yeah, I have a question kind of about the magic hour. You could say that in the golden hour, it's like you get those really strong, deep, rich shadows, and you get that really warm light. When you move into the magic hour, do your shadows start to diffuse a little bit? Is your light like more diffused?
Yes, absolutely. And that's because the sun is starting to dip below the horizon. So yeah, the light that we're seeing is the light that is still being bounced off of our atmosphere. So we go from having like really harsh, distinct lines with our, quality of our light to getting this really soft, luscious light. And it's almost velvety and of sorts. So yeah, absolutely. You're going to get, with magic hour, you're going to have a lot more of a softer quality of light versus golden hour, where you tend to have a harsher, harder quality of light.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Any other questions? All right. Well, we're going to move into our next section, which are our two types of light. This is pretty simple. You have natural light and you have artificial light, and you can always mix the both to create an image. So natural light, this might be a controversial photo opinion, but this is the opinion that I have. You can take it or leave it if you want, but this is the light that already exists in your environment and is not just from the sun. And artificial light is light that you create specifically for that photograph. So we're going to kind of delve into that. If you look at these gorgeous bow, these are shot using the sunlight that day. So it was really bright, kind of midday, very hot outside. Here's an image that is using natural light. There's some qualities of natural light that is coming from the sun that nothing else in studio with flashes or studio lights can mimic. There's just like this really, I can't describe it, this quality that you're not going to see elsewhere. Here are some examples too of natural light. Here's my controversial opinion. All of these photos are shot inside. None of them are shot using the sun to light them. But the light in these spaces is natural to these spaces. So again, our man trimming nopales in the market, he is in light that is natural to the market. Our chef in the center, he is in light in this kitchen that is natural to this kitchen. Our dancer in the school gym is in light that is natural to the school gym. It might not be the prettiest light, but it is still light that is natural to that environment in which you're shooting. This, however, is light that was created specifically for this photo. There's nothing wrong with whatever you decide to do, but I think it is wise learning that artificial light and natural light are distinctly different. However, you can always take artificial light and try to make it look as natural as possible, which I think is the goal we all try to have. This is a photo that's actually shot, that is artificially lit, but it still just kind of looks like the light is pouring in through a window. You know, it's very soft, it's very textural. And then you can take both types of light. Ellen, here are your peaches wrapped in biscuits. And if you guys need a baking project, you should try this one out, but maybe not with peaches, unless you have peaches somewhere this time of year. You're lucky if you do. But that's besides the point. I digress. This photo has two different types of light, both natural and artificial. There is natural light pouring in from the back of the photo because you can see it reflected off of the coffee. And then we have artificial light bouncing in opposite that is coming in and is lighting this peach wrapped in a biscuit. And you can also kind of tell based on the shadows. If you look on this yellow plate, you have a shadow falling behind and a shadow falling in front. Our key light in this instance is whatever is illuminating the subject of this photo, which would be the biscuit, versus the natural light pouring in from the back. Any questions on natural and artificial light before we move on? I'm going to take a sip of my...
Lauren, can you address just reflection and silverware for a sec?
Yeah.
what are your thoughts, and what's the best way to do that?
I have a really unpopular opinion about reflections in silverware, and that is I actually really love the reflections in silverware, and it makes a lot of art directors really angry.
It's okay. You can come sit by me.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So you just leave it.
Well, you can leave it. I think with silverware, specifically if you're thinking about shooting food and tabletop stuff, you can always, so the way light travels and reflects off of things is always at a 45-degree angle.
Okay.
That's science. It is physics. That's how light works. So you can always think about where your light is coming into your frame or onto your set and where your silverware is in relation to that.
Okay.
Also, a trick that a lot of people do is you can buy, I don't really actually know what the type of spray is. It's like a mattifying spray where you can spray silverware or other shiny objects so they are not reflecting anything.
Okay.
But quite often what you're starting to see in the food photography world is silverware and servingware that is already matte or is like patinaed off the bat, like when you purchase it.
Okay.
So you could also always look for that. I love to go to like Target or World Market or Sur La Table where they have like loose silverware that you can buy by the piece and find matte silverware. Sometimes I find some of that at thrift shops as well. It just kind of depends on the specific type of silverware you're wanting for your image.
Right. Great.
But nobody says that you have, like in this specific image, this is a very intentional set down of the fork and knife. But also just taking silverware and kind of like having it wrapped in a linen or off to the side, like somebody is about to come and sit down, is totally acceptable as well. But I think there's lots of different things that you can do with it. But if you're trying to hide it, mattifying spray, paying attention to where light hits your set, or just buying matte or patinaed silverware.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Any other questions? Cool. We're going to keep on because at the end of the day, if you don't have good light in your house, you're lying to me unless you live in a box that has no windows. If in doubt, window it out. When I was a teacher, this was like my mantra. It should have been painted on the walls of my classroom because windows or doorways are an instant light source for whatever you are trying to photograph. They create direction and they typically like take this big, huge light that's coming in from outside and funnel it in and onto your set. And you can create any direction of light with window light. If the window is behind you and your subject is in front of you, you're creating front light. You can put your subject in the window so they're getting, or the doorway, so they're getting lit from behind, or you can put them to the left. You can put them next to the window with the window on the left or the right, and you can create side light. It's great. I really love window light. I don't actually shoot enough with window light anymore, so maybe that's what I'll do during our quarantine. But you can also pick different windows in your space or in your house or in your flat or apartment. Windows that face the north and the south are mostly going to have soft light because no direct light tends to pour through those. I say that, although it kind of depends on the time of year and how the light is traveling around your home. And then windows that are facing the east or the west, you're going to get hard light pouring in, like direct sunlight pouring in, depending on the time of day. And just as a side note with your window, unless you want splotches or mottled light in your photo, make sure your windows are clean. You'll save yourself some time in Photoshop or whatever, because if you don't want splotches, which as I'm sitting here in my studio, my windows are covered in splotches of pollen. So I should probably do that also. But if you guys are not sure where to find good light, go find a window. That is my final say. If you're having fun doing Instagram lives or, you know, talking on FaceTime to people and you're like, man, I look so gross, or I don't like the way I'm looking, or I'm completely like in shadow, turn around to a window and you'll get some light that is pouring on you. Can you guys all still see what I'm doing good? Is everything hanging in there? If you can just chime in and let me know.
Looks good.
All right.
You froze for a second for me, but all's good otherwise, so.
Okay, just let me know. If not, I think our internet here is getting really bogged down with everybody who's at home. So we're going to show a few more examples of some photos in window light. This photo of this kitchen, the main light source that is hitting them is coming from the left-hand side. There's a huge window in this kitchen. You can see it's illuminating this pastry chef in the back and in the front, and even all the way over to the right. We have some other light sources that we can actually see in this photo, but those obviously are not the light sources that are lighting our subjects. In this photo of rhubarb, this was shot right up next to a window. The shadows are not very strong, although you can see them. So one, this is soft light. Two, you can see that the light is coming from the side. Again, I know I said there's not a lot of shadows, but if you look up at the top of this image, you can see the highlights on this orange juice with this rhubarb. So that's kind of showing you the direction of where this light is coming from. Here's another photo shot using window light of Mackenzie, who's also in this class. And obviously you can see the window that is right next to her. So you can see the light coming in through the window, illuminating her and these beautiful dumplings that she's taking a photo of. Something I want to note, and I'm going to probably I will talk about it later. But you can always put your light source into your photos. And sometimes that can add like a new little bit of intrigue or interesting factor to your photos as well. Here are two other photos shot using window light. This photo on the left-hand side is shot using a window. There's a backdrop behind her. And I was able to use some blackboards to kind of darken up some of these spaces that I wanted to be dark with this image. And then the photo of the radishes and the butter are also shot in window light, but this is a hard quality window light versus the soft on the left-hand side. And again, like you can see the window panes in this image. And so play around with your light, honestly, like when it comes down to it, just have fun with it. Both of these two also window light. The photo on the left is of a man standing in front of the bottom of the pyramid at the Louvre, which is basically a big giant pyramid shaped window. So you can kind of, in that sense, I just played around with where I was placing the light behind people as they were walking by. And in this photo of my baby Tahine and Valentina packets, I was playing around with this light coming through my window. Again, you can look and see that it's direct light pouring in because it is very hard. The shadows are very defined. If you're looking at the color of light, you can tell that it is during our kind of golden hour. The light has this really nice golden quality to it. Our shadows are opposite of that. They are blue. And we're getting side light based off of seeing where our shadows are coming from. Any questions on windows or doorways as your light source?
Talk to me a little bit about screen doors. So if you, let's say mid-afternoon, you've got screen door with some decent light. Would you do anything to adjust the texture of the screen coming through? Would you shoot from a different direction?
So if you have soft light pouring through your screen door, your screen is only just going to act like a diffuser.
Okay.
So it is going to just kind of diffuse and soften that light a little bit.
Okay.
You might have to, with your camera, adjust your settings to allow more light to enter the camera.
Right. Okay.
But you wouldn't have to move your screen per se.
No, I'm thinking of not the screen, but the object, is
the object. Yeah, I don't think you would have to do it. Now, if you have direct light coming through that screen,
yeah.
Like I'm sitting here looking at the screen in my studio right now that goes to one of my doors.
Right.
Depending on the time of day and depending on how close I'm placing my object next to that screen, this specific window gets really hard light that pours through. So I will see the perfect little grid of my screen. Okay. On that note, I will either open up the screen and take it out of my space or wait a little bit. But also if you move your object away from that screen, the perfect grid that you're going to see is going to start to diffuse away and you're not going to see it as much.
And it'll soften.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right. So another thing I want to talk about with lighting is bracketing. Especially when you're shooting in light that can be a little difficult, whether it's backlight or hard light, taking a series of photos that are underexposed a little bit, perfectly exposed according to your camera's settings, and overexposed allows you to see whether or not you want more of your shadows to come through, details in your shadows to come through, or if you want more of those details to silhouette and get some of your details and your highlights to show up. This is just a practice that I think is good. It is helpful, especially when you're learning, to take 1 or 2 photos of the same set, underexposed, 1 perfectly exposed, and 1 to 2 overexposed, to see if your, quote, perfect exposure is actually perfect according to you. Photography is a form of art. Everything is subjective. It is how your eye sees it. And as long as you can stand behind your opinions, you do whatever it is that you feel you want to do. But oftentimes, especially when you're shooting on your phone, what your phone thinks is a perfect exposure is not perfect. Again, on your phone, if you're trying to bracket, you can always tap on whatever it is you're trying to expose for, your shadows or your highlights, and you can adjust, then take your finger and slide it up and down to make your photo brighter or darker. This just allows you to pick the best exposure to show the details that you want to show within your photo. Now, probably the most important thing about light, despite or except for having a window, is just get weird with it. Seriously, the only way you're going to learn to see and learn to play and learn to use light the way you want to use it in your photos is to play with it. So you can create flares. Flares are easy to create when you have a light source that's pouring into your photo, or you have light that is backlighting your subject, and you can partially cover that up. You'll get some fun flares. You can shoot through prisms. This photo of my dog is shot through a glass prism. And or other home filters. Filters are literally anything you just put in front of your lens. So You can play around with Ziploc bags. You can play around with pieces of glass, colored plastic, anything. Honestly, you can play around with the screen door. Other things you can do is you can use gels. You can put colored gels over your lights. Again, you can show the light source in your photo. Use reflections to kind of play around with that light. And then look around for that intersection of light and shadow. So I have some examples to show you guys on that. But most importantly, when it comes to light, just play with it. If I'm rolling through from left to right, the photo on the far left of the girl using the camera, this is shot where there's a prism in the photo, so it's kind of flaring this light and giving it some fun, wild blobs of color. And then also I have a flash that is gelled, so we're getting this like really cool pink hazy hue. In the photo of the chef, I'm using a light source to, one, place it in my photo so you can see in the top left-hand side of the, or top right-hand side of this photo, there's a heat lamp. And that heat lamp is giving me some haze. It is giving me a little bit of glare. It is also illuminating the chef a little bit. In this wild photo of strawberries and roses, I'm merely just, again, playing with a prism and playing with putting other things in front of my lens and seeing how the light kind of is, how my camera sees the light through those filters that I'm using. And then in the photo on the far right, I'm playing around with how the light off of this building is reflecting in a pond. But again, just play around with your light. You're gonna have a lot of fun with it. And here's a couple photos on this intersection of light and shadow. There's a lot of really interesting things that can happen photographically when you're finding these patches of light within shadow and waiting for your subject or placing your subject into those spaces. So here we have this pig at a farm who is stepping into this light. What this does is I exposed for the highlights. So all the shadows fell to black, which emphasizes and puts the focus on this cute little pig. In the photo on the right-hand side, I saw where there's this shadow that is created by these trees, and where these people are walking out of the shadows and creating their own shadows in this light space. On that note, it was also a very cloudy day in London where the light was trying to break through the clouds. So by playing around and exposing for my highlights in these images, I'm able to create some really dramatic looks with my light. And here are two other areas, two other examples, I guess, using light and shadow. And creating photos at the edge of that. The photo of this cocktail, which, God, I would love to have that right now. But by putting my studio light where I did, now if you look at the shadows, you can tell that the light is on the side of this cocktail and it is up high, pointing down. But I use this is actually a planter. But you can use objects in your background to create some fun shadows that are gonna make your subject pop off that background. And then same thing with these flowers, with these dogwoods, you know, they're in the light, but the background is completely in shadow. So it is allowing those flowers to pop off the background without distraction. Anybody have any questions on playing with light and getting weird? All right, we are gonna recap and then I'm gonna give you your lighting challenge. So we have 4 characteristics of light. We have quality, intensity, direction, and color. Our 2 types of light are natural and artificial. And natural does not mean it has to come from the sun. It is just the light that is natural in the space or environment in which you're shooting. Always have a key light. That is the main light that is focusing and bringing attention to your subject or your focal point. Look to shadows or highlights if shadows are hard to tell, but always look to see those shadows and figure out where your light is coming from. If you're working with difficult light, it never hurts to bracket, and always be weird and experimental. And if in doubt, window it out. Seriously, windows are your best friend when it comes to photography. Sometimes you can have too many windows though, so make sure you have something to block light if you want to block light with. So here's our recap. Any questions so far? You guys are great. And here are your light challenges for this week. If you tuned in yesterday, I gave a composition challenge. I'm giving you another lighting challenge. If you want to work on applying your compositions to these photos as well, the more you practice, the better you get. I'm not giving a due date. Again, take your time with this stuff. Feel free to shoot me an email with your photos or a DM with your photos, and I'm happy to give feedback and help talk you through some of the stuff. But here are your rules for your lighting challenge. Always have a key light. Utilize your compositions if you would like. And if you weren't here yesterday, the composition lesson is linked in my Instagram bio. Practice social distancing, please. I am not going to be responsible for you getting sick doing these photo challenges. And then tag me on Instagram or use hashtag LVA Photo School to see them. I'll be sharing my favorite ones in my stories. So without further ado, let's try light. So take a small object, like Happy Meal toy size, and I want you to take photos of it in 10 different types of light. While you're doing this, practice metering in both your highlights and your shadows. Here's an example of that. This is my minion. My minion has been photographed in many different types of light. But have fun with it. Be carefree with it. Explore with it. Know that you cannot do this wrong, because the more you shoot and the more different types of light you're placing this object in, the more you're going to learn to start seeing light. Then I want you guys, you can take a portrait or a still life using soft window light. If you only have windows that get direct sunlight during the day, you can put up a sheet. You can move away from that light source a little bit so you're not getting direct light on, and that'll soften up your light. Then I want you to do the same thing using hard window light, just so you can see the differences. I want you to try a silhouette, either using a window or a sunrise or sunset. Again, please practice social distancing. I don't want anybody to get sick because you are out taking pictures. I want you to take a high key photo of fruit. If you don't have fruit, you can use whatever you have. And then a low key photo of a baked good. So remember, high key means really bright, lots of whites, lots of bright colors. Low key is really dark, lots of blacks, very moody. And if you don't have baked good, you can use whatever you want. It's totally fine. And then lastly, take a photo of your salt and pepper shakers using an experimental technique, whether it's you're shooting through something, using a gel, maybe looking at that intersection of light and shadow, playing around with it. Any questions on this, guys? I will be putting this challenge up in my Instagram stories. So if you're frantically writing it down right now, you're welcome to just screenshot that in about 10 minutes, if that is easier for you. And then they will live in the highlights as well, so you can kind of go back and look through that. Again, this is about what you should do for your 10 different light challenge. You're welcome to do more. When I was a teacher, I would make my kids shoot this with 36 different types of light. And lastly, you can do it. I know you can. Here's some Jerry for some mat talk and some minions cheering you on. And I'm gonna pop out of this and stop the screen sharing. All right, does anybody have any questions?
It was so great.
Thank you. Well, thank you guys for tuning in. Again, if you need anything, I'm here via DM or email. My email is lauren@laurenvallen.com. That also exists as like a click on my Instagram profile, but feel free to send me your images. I'm happy to look at them, happy to give you feedback, happy to help. I'm here for you guys, and I hope everybody stays healthy and has a beautiful weekend and cooks a lot and eats a lot and photographs a lot of things. So I will see you guys on Monday. If you're popping in for manual mode, same time, 3 to 4, right here on Zoom. So, all right. Bye, guys. You're welcome. Thanks for coming in.